자, History of Theater를 하겠습니다. Called attention to the pastness of classical civilization. Engraving of classical ruins were widely began to show classical structures in various stages of deterioration, with shrubs and vines growing for visitors. This renewed interest in his history also stimulated the writing of works based on the post-classical wars were set in the ages, and they brought Gothic and architecture into the theater. The later 18th century also brought a rebellion against Baroque music and art, with its ornamentally non-functional details. Artists and erudites sought to recapture the simplicity of early Florentine opera and to stage action and music century, known today above all through the works of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, form devoid of an extraneous ornament and detail. But perhaps the most important innovation of the late 18th century was the introduction of mood into design. Before the late 19th century, settings were for the most part painted so that every detail clearly designers precisely adopted by many scanographic. His drawing of ruins computed much to the interest in ruined antiques, shadow, accelerated interest in atmospherical realities. A few shifts of light, the concern for greater realism of appropriate illuminating footlights were not too fraught, however, for another century. In spite of trend toward greater visual variety represented in late 18th century, opera can be reduced to about 12 locale idealized settings could be remained unchanged. Innovations at 1050 importantly harbingers of romanticisms, which soon as to become dominant mode. If it's Italy's designers dominated the theater of Europe, cannot be said of its dramatistics. The two of honored was not popular in 18th, based on the classical story of discovers the truth and is able to effect revenge. Feria sought to present the most. As a result, his tragedies are closer to those of Ratian than to typical 18th century works. Of his dramas, which include powerful leaders now vacillating between madness, works are marked by his strong message. Successors, though none rose to his artistical level. Comedy fared somewhat better than tragedy, was largely channeled. 83 musical dramas and about 150 comedies. Many he is credited with making characterizes nobility, dissident, and in this play, Mardonian ruled is by three: her honest, resourceful servant, Fabrizio Goldoni, began his program for reforming the. He worked his most successfully and to master into the comedy Real Beta, for unfortunately increase its crude, unfeeling friends in the 1740 Carlo changes that would be forced with Jussiat trained dramatic center in Italy significantly Italian comedies Godin's interests he wrote 10 tragedy only the part of the comic servant hero to Ferdinand was left to be improvised as it was played by Italy's Teatro Santo Angelo. Radical changes to the traditional form by this time. Peter's theory becoming famous, he argued that the methods of the commedia were antiquated. He called for abdomining masks because they prevented subtle facial expression situation of comedy, since he had already abolished improvisation. He was calling for the elimination of virtually or of remained until his death to write for the Commedia Italiana, the Commedia Missouri, lecturers, pantalonist, merchant, good for father, solid citizen, regular comedy remained important because they were an inspiration. 영감 Commedia, but his work was soon eclipsed by Elizabeth Cabrera adaptation, 적응, Spanish, French drama of the 18th century. Throughout the 18th century, France dominance was considerably weakened by a series of wars and by disastrous economic policy, disastrous 재앙 of Spanish succession, which resulted when Louis sought to unite France and Spain by placing most of the rest of Europe between 701, humiliating defeats by England, Austria, were to England unhappiness which eventually erupted in the Revolution, cultural center of Europe throughout the 18th century, and its drama was standard against to be backward-looking, taking standards from the 17th century. 사업이 잘 안 됩니다. For his emphasizes 강조하다. The most popular, her former husband, a number of complex relating to kill and was messages. The trend toward melodrama, evident in his plot, was accelerated by prosa arose served during contested based on the love of children for electoral acceleration. Best play is organized harmony is loved by Redhead's harp crew. 잔인한 brother-in-law 법률 after numerous 이름 있는 recognition 인지 뭐 이런 뜻입니다. The death of Zambia finds happiness in marriage to the victorious Assyrians. This play, considered one of the finest of the 18th century, held the stage and thought, beginning with Olympus. He wrote 40 plays more as respects Voltaire's tragedies. Continued trend, complex plots involved complex character relationships and sudden 갑자기 Lusigan, the Christian former king of the area, a fellow slave, Peru, argues that a religion 되게 중요한 말입니다. 페루 지역의 toward 향하다 sentimentalism is reflected for the frequent use of the voice foreshadow recognition scenes 장면 effectively were frustrated by the presence of spectaculars on the stage, and it was largely due to his influence that the practice of was abolished. Public immerse in history, local color plays about the French national past, exploited numerous popular works, became the leader of the troupe. This world of clever rascals who prey upon each other under the surface, locked thinly discussed criticisms. Louis, aroused by the play, left Liga Extangled, were produced by the illegitimate theaters at the Parisian fairs. Champion and Mervex, most of Maronec's plays are concerned with economy. A supposed servant, consequently, sometimes linked to Russian revelations. Development of this sentimentalism has charm and wit raised him far above his contagious conflicts. Critical structure was grown steadily since the late 19th century until about faced 직면하다 revelation previously unknown facts and rewarded information refinement delicious. Several of authors 작가 expressed 표현 argue 논쟁하다 comedy concerned with virtue in staging, for he believed the drama would move foreshadowed some aspects of religion, but they dreams because of its superior characterization and obvious dedication. Minor theater's century was melodrama. The Marriage Kegel, the former a comedy of intrigue in which an elderly commentary upon society and class relationships set ostensibly is Spain reflects contemporary attempts to curb its privilege has profoundly lower classes who bore the burden of taxation. Innovations have been made before the revolution inaugurated era in France. In the 19th century, the payment orders was regulated. Government calculations income from the annual box. The National Assembly 1791 fees each performance of their works. In 1700 there were only two legitimate troupes in Paris opera. The companies were to remain the major ones throughout the century. Petition challenge came from the illegally made street theaters at the fairs, especially those of since the 16th century. The fairs featured such as freaks. In the late 17th century, they introduced sketch and comedy plays. When the Italian company was expelled, France seized the opportunity to significant minor firm to emerge Nathaniel. The troops gave up writing. When case after controversial 논쟁, in his words, spoken dialogue alternates with verses to popular variated acts, contrasts sharply with the stage performances of the comedy. Regent of the young Louis XY troop back to France installed in Hotel National Treaty, diversified and Italian translations of French treatises and tragic comedies. He added a few works in French in 1000. Others had Marvius to write plays for him. At the time of the company granted rules similar to those of the comedy Francis. The fair companies which had been suppressed Samuel-Taggart fair companies subject matter in favor more sentimental stories. Charles Simon afterward was especially successful with the new type between minor theaters for this rest of the century. The two significant innovations were made in Intercomigu after the revival. The Servant, the Mistress proved so popular that between repertory the fair troops to provide opera comic. He returned to original form of comic under scoring emotional scenes of innocence. Italian dropped French repertory. The minor companies also began to perform dramas. After 1760, the fair troops began to relocate on Iguada. 말고 이제 끝냈고요. 이게 시어트리 in lasting way, lasting way, lasting. First of all, we must recognize the theater condition to be rediscovered. Plague it is only because it lies wherever it passes it, else than immense liquidation. Theater, theater also takes gestures and pushes them as far as they will go, they will go, they will go. Restores us as our dormant, another impossible merely. Theater theater only moment when impossible really begins, burst forth in the use of city and of existence only if remains virtual imposes heroically criminal and audaciously ostentatious, ostentatiously heroic patient victims reveal themselves ready to render destiny treat for treat blow of blow, and Leva captured, convicted of adultery and incest templed floated laws, poetry which consecrated poet endless Gavana, the lover inspired 고무되다 passionate 열정 overthrows 그 이후로 himself is the one managed to kill his reviver, his sister's husband, who was there to come between him and his love, and dispatches final combat, which then appears as his own space agony. Like the plague, the traitor is formidable, called to the forces that impel the mind by are. In terrorizing operation, evil is its mysteries of Elias was produced is in its pure, truly revealed form corresponds to dark hour certain ancient tragedy which our true theater must recover. Contagious, but because like the plague, it is relevant, the meanings of which are per- perverse possibilities of the mind whenever whether of an individual of a people are localized powers that are nourished by a power even more profound until extinction. In the theater, as in the plague, there is kind of strange sound, or even possibly suddenly become or our normal element. Freedom is dark, infallible. It identified sexual freedom, which is also dark, although we do not know precise manner of the libido, which is identified with all this dirty, abstract, infamous in the process of flying and of throwing oneself